Well, good evening, everyone, on this Tuesday evening of February 22nd, 2022. So happy Tuesday, everyone. We have a special guest with us tonight. She's been working in the field for 30 years in the field of organ and tissue donation for transplant and research. So in 1988, after graduating from Virginia Commonwealth University, her first job was at UNOS, or of course, the United Network for Organ Sharing. So Gina has spent the last 28 years with the International Institute for the Advancement of Medicine, building relationships with organ and tissue recovery partners in the US and medical researchers worldwide, currently in the role of the executive director. Gina has remained relevant with the industry organizations and associations, presently serving as the chair of the National Leadership and Innovation Council for the Alliance, the AATB Quality Council, AATB Education Committee, and serves on the American Transplant Society Advisory Committee. She also has authored several articles and posters promoting research donation, most recently as a co-author. And we're glad to have her with us tonight. So with us is Gina Dunsmith, excuse me. Gina, yes. Glad to have you with us.
I'm going to start by saying that I feel really deprived all of a sudden that I've gone through 55 years of my life and did not have Bill's comedy on a day-to-day basis. And I automatically know that you all are better for it. So I got my first dose. I'm going to be doing a presentation tonight, and I'm going to make sure that I am in the screen saving mode. This should be right there. If you could just let me know that you are seeing what you should be seeing.
We are seeing what you're showing.
Perfect. And so I'm really excited. You'll find that I am quite the chatty Cathy. And I'm going to talk to you in broad strokes really about organ donation, which of course you all know quite a bit about, but this is kind of a path that most people don't think about when you think about organ donation. So I wanted to start a little bit about my road to IIAM. And as Bill just shared with you, I did start in 1988, right out of college. And I was fortunate that I have been in this lane really for 33 years of what I would now call my calling. And I think that the eye-opening experience for me was that, first of all, I don't think that, when you graduate from college, that the idea of donation, unless you have a reason because you know a donor or you know somebody that needs an organ or tissue or eyes. And so I was fortunate that I did not have that type of exposure and was just kind of, it was my happy accident to land in the role as an intern for UNOS at the Organ Center. And it was in my 5 years of doing that work that it became really apparent each time that we would try to allocate an organ from a donor somewhere in the United States to a recipient center somewhere else in the United States, that when we exhausted the list and there was really nobody left to call, that folks were not paying attention to the authorization form. So I would always say, I'm sorry that we didn't place these kidneys for a transplant recipient. Is there authorization for research? Can I try to place it with a medical research institute? And we can help that way. And, over the years, what was glaring was that nobody really paid attention to that part of the authorization form and really that opportunity for donation. And so my next job was with IIAM to basically be a manager of education and to talk about this. And so now it's all I love to talk about because we have really built a network throughout the United States that has proven that this is in fact a very real, very necessary, and a very successful way to honor a donor gift. So just a little bit about who my organization is. It is the International Institute for the Advancement of Medicine. It doesn't roll off the tongue easily, whether you spell it out or you use the acronym. So we kind of drop an I, and I say IAM. Our parent company is the Musculoskeletal Transplant Foundation. If you haven't figured it out, we really like to work with 4 really long word organizations. And so they're short for MTF Biologics, which is the world's largest tissue bank. It's an allograft transplant bank. And so I was kind of all organs all the time. And my parent company, as of 1993, became a tissue bank. What is beautiful about that, and I'll share with you really about having a tissue bank as your parent company, is that when there are no rules, in a sense, about research, donation, and how you can allocate organs for research, when your parent company is subjected to very, very stringent regulatory policies, they also have an expectation for any division within it to also, wherever applicable, to abide by those same regulatory policies. So that has been probably the greatest benefit of IAM being part of MTF Biologics. I will also share with you what IIAM's role and experience, but I'm also going to talk really about, in general, research organizations. So here, I can tell you that we are a virtual organization. Everything we do is really facilitated remotely. We don't ever see an organ. We don't procure the organ. We do not obtain the authorization. We not do the donor risk assessment interview. We rely on OPOs to do all of that for us. So every single organ and tissue that comes to IAM starts with an OPO and starts as an organ donor. And we only get a phone call when there is going to be at least one organ procured for the purposes of donation for transplantation. That is when we get to now be a part of that donation outcome and process. So we allocate literally from the site of the organ recovery within the OPO's designated service area to wherever that researcher is. So we coordinate that and we transport that organ right over to the researcher. So we don't ever bring anything into a lab. We don't have a lab. We don't have inventory of organs or tissues that were procured and that we're saving them for a future placement. This is very real-time, time critical, just like organ donation for transplant. So it's interesting that that's where I came from. And in the last 28 years of my life, that's very much the model that we have built within IIAM. We want everything to be as seamless as possible because we don't want to ask them to stay in an OR longer than they have to, mostly because they've got to get out of that OR and take care of those organs that just came out and give them to their recipient center. It's very, very expensive to be in an operating room. And so we don't want to really extend their time if we don't have to. And the surgeon is right there. And that surgeon is not only going to recover organs for transplant, but that surgeon will recover those organs for research for us as well. So everything really is done simultaneously. And you'll hear that, we are a 24/7 operation. Researchers are not always. And so that's a bit of a disadvantage. But we're screening about 24 to 26 new donors every day, averaging about 3 organs referred with each case, with each donor. We screen about 35,000 non-transplantable organs every year to try to place organs for medical researchers in honor of a donor gift. So we're very, very mission driven. Again, our purpose is to honor the wishes of the donor and the donor family. We can't do that without that partnership of US OPOs. And our researchers are not only US based, but also can be international as well. And in the hands of these talented individuals that are brilliant, groundbreaking research is taking place, and that is to try to cure and treat diseases. Our role and our purpose, again, is to make sure that while reviewing the donor information, that we are then matching, our recipient list is the researcher instead of a transplant waiting list. And so we like to consider that research really is a way to address the other waiting list, people that die every day waiting for a cure, and where a transplant is not going to be what will save their lives. It's nothing that can be fixed with a new organ. And so through the work that we do, we are not only honoring these donor gifts, we are helping with transplant technology, which is incredible because it's taking previously rejected organs and making them usable. It's taking organs that couldn't get from point A to point B because of the viability of an organ going too far, too long outside of the body before it's used somewhere else, and making sure that we can extend that opportunity. And then more than anything, again, we're trying to find a cure. And so for all of these reasons, we are very much about saving and healing lives. I mentioned before that we are blessed to be part of MTF Biologics because there really is no oversight for research organs. You have AOPO, which is the Association of Organ Procurement Organizations, and that is like one entity that audits OPOs. Every single OPO, there are 57 of them in the United States, has to be part of the Organ Procurement Transplant Network and has to be a member of UNOS and be a member in good standing. And so there's all kinds of oversight and regulatory agencies when it comes to organs for transplant, certainly tissues for transplant, but not organs for research. So to the degree that we can, we really do honor what is expected of anybody that is working with a donated human organ or tissue. So we are working only within the OPTN network. We recognize the guidance that CMS bestows upon an OPO. And recently they just actually changed all the rules as to what qualifies as a donor. In the past, a donor could be anybody that the OPO is managing and screening and allocating organs. But if in the end, there were no organs that could be procured for the purposes of transplant and transplanted, CMS has now said that does not qualify as a donor, with the exception of whether a pancreas for research is placed in that now counts as a donor. So research has now played a more prominent role in really the arena of OPOs and donation. And certainly the Uniform Anatomic Gift Act comes into play because it identifies the hierarchy of who is qualified as the legal next of kin that can authorize donation of the individual. And then with NOTA, the National Organ Transplant Act, there's no buying or selling of organs. So it's reasonable costs for organ recovery and reasonable reimbursement for services provided. The one area in medical research that now has kind of stepped into a very interesting technology would be when you take a whole organ and then you isolate cells from that organ, and then you use those cells in a clinical application. Those then actually do follow the FDA for the human cell and tissue products. So anybody that is using cells from an organ, that part is the first time that there's really anybody regulated. And so, so that's a good step. I'm going to pause sometimes and just allow anybody if they want to ask questions, or I can save that to the end. Okay, I'll keep going. So we're going to do a lot of the who, what, when, where, why, and how, because I wanted to give you this broad overview. To start with, really, medical research organizations, there are not a lot of entities that do what we do. There's really two organizations that are as large as I am, and we are one of the two, and then the National Disease Research Interchange, NDRI. They were born 6 years before we were in 1980, and then IAM came along in 1986. Outside of that, there really are not very many organizations that do what we do in that we partner with these OPOs, and we're trying to allow for an extended opportunity of that organ donation and that tissue donation in the hands of those experts. So when it comes to organizations that can accept non-transplantable organs and tissues, you either have a national organization like IAM or NDRI. there are a lot of universities or labs, hospital labs that are within the OPO's service area. And so an OPO, it's very easy for them to just certainly support whatever type of local research is happening. And that makes the most logical sense because organs need to maintain their viability. And so placing an organ close by is just like placing an organ from a donor and with a recipient that's in the very same hospital. So organ viability is really critical to the success of many of the research studies that are happening. And then on top of that, you have opportunities for biobanks where there is long-term storage of either a whole organ or segments of organs or tissues and cells from organs. And so again, that is maybe not going to be placed and used in research today, but there might be an opportunity tomorrow, next month, next year. So those are really kind of the layouts about, how people can donate and again, with really limited institutions, but they're all quite a bit different from each other. So I mentioned before, this is going to be kind of the who. So universities, these are going to be the end users or the recipient of research tissue. So universities are very involved, and that can be really with organs and tissues as well as the ultimate gift, which is a whole body donor. And so those are like willed body programs at the medical schools. So you have a lot of universities, you have government agencies like the National Institute for Health, the Department of Defense, the FDA. You have a very, very large population within the pharmaceutical arena where human tissue is incredibly critical for ways to improve treatments of human disease. And that's anywhere from diabetes to cancer to the common cold to COVID. So these pharmaceuticals are really, really critical in the quality of life that we are benefiting from. And animal tissue is not human tissue. Animal models are not human models. So that's the one thing that the pharmaceutical community really relies on donated organs and tissues because they're really looking for an example of how human cells react and how human metabolism occurs and how human enzymes respond to medicine. There's a lot of biotech companies, and I'll talk in several slides later just about some of the really incredible cutting edge work that has been done in the medical research community, but that's done kind of in this section here, the biotech world. This really involves anywhere from creating 3D printed organs or tissues, which is happening in kind of baby steps right now. It's also why folks are able to recreate decellularized and recellularized organs or tissues or even vascular composite allografts, which are called VCAs. And that can be the human face. And we've all seen stories that were 15 years ago a movie and considered science fiction that is now real life in the front page of your local newspaper that's talking about an exciting level of transplantation that never could be done before. So it's kind of these worlds that marry the universities that have incredibly skilled surgeons, and together they come up with these concepts of how we can really recreate the human body and repair it and just help us to live a better quality of life. And then there is the device community, and I'll show you some images there, but devices are going to capture machines that allow for organs to go on a normothermic or a hyperthermic, so room temperature versus very cold machines that allow the organ to kind of still act as if it's in the body and that it's still pumping. And again, that really extends the life of that organ so it can make it to a recipient that's much farther away. Again, in the who can be an organ or tissue donor for research? And I think it really starts with the intention of the donor. If the donor started by saying, I would like to donate organs and tissues for transplant and medical research, then that's the who. Because as long as you're an organ donor, you really can be a research donor. It doesn't mean that you will be. Just like with organ donation for transplant, you want to be, but not everybody will be. And it has a lot to do with the health of the individual, the health of the organ. And in the world of research, what's so unique about it is it's not matching blood group. It's not matching the human leukocyte antigens, the HLA, on a kidney to make sure that the kidney from a donor doesn't reject in the kidney in the recipient. So with researchers, they don't match things that way. They really match your lifestyle. They match, what did you do while you were alive? Was your heart healthy or was it diseased? Because even better, maybe that it was diseased, because that's what the researcher is studying, is the diseased heart. And so they need to look at, what does the diseased heart look like? How does it behave? And how can I create a scope, a little camera that's going to go through the vasculature and help me really get to the point where I can see what is blocking the human heart? Well, they can't do that on a patient without having tested it really in their lab or in an OR, but on what is the closest resemblance to living tissue, which is a donor organ. So diseased organs as well as healthy organs, so that a researcher, again, who may also be a surgeon, can look at what is an organ supposed to look like? And then what does it look like when it becomes exceptionally diseased? What is a cell supposed to look like? How is a cell supposed to respond to a medicine? But if that cell comes from a lung with cystic fibrosis, why won't that cell respond? And how can I fix it? So really having a perfectly healthy organ or tissue where cells are derived, or a diseased one, kind of uncovers the puzzle and the mystery of human disease. And so that's the beauty of why researchers can use normal tissue from a young person all the way up to an aged person. We have donors that are 1 day old, and we have donors that are in their 80s. And remember, they started with an organ donor. So those same donors that we're getting, those very young and very aged donor organs, are because they were able to also be an organ donor. And then I'm going to talk just a little bit right here about whole body donation, because it really is another area of medical research that's critical. A whole body donor is going to be somebody's best teacher that anybody will ever have. It will teach them all about human anatomy. And again, what is normal, what is supposed to, what is a tissue system supposed to look like? So they may have age restrictions in that younger donors can't always be a whole body donor because that's not mature. It's not mature organs. It's not mature limbs. And these are really used for surgical education, technique development, to teach surgeons, instruments that will allow a doctor or a surgeon to explore the human body, to heal the human body. And so if the tissue it's not mature, then it doesn't really reflect the common type of patient that they may be working with. Also, if you have a whole body donor that was also an organ or tissue donor, there is therefore not a whole body. And so it kind of complicates the educational process of, this is what the cardiac system looks like. This is what the thoracic region looks like. This is what the abdominal region looks like, the endocrine system. But when critical organs are missing, it's really hard for those medical students or for a surgeon to perform a mock surgery without really knowing, what is missing. So they often are saying that organ donation or tissue donation will preclude whole body donation because they need the body to be intact. And then also, depending on the institutions, there may be some other disease restrictions, which again would complicate the teaching aspect of normal anatomy. Any questions there? Okay, I'll move on. So as far as what? Any organ or tissue can be donated. It's whether there is an end user, because again, we don't store anything. So it's whether there's a need today at this hour. IAM works with about 90 different research institutions with about 360 different research projects. And so therefore there's on any given day an opportunity to try to match an organ or a tissue with a researcher. But if that researcher just accepted an organ, that's it for him. So it doesn't mean that it can't be used ever when somebody's trying to be a donor. It means that that organ, unfortunately, on that day cannot be used for that study. So in general, any type of organ is needed and benefits medical research. A variety of different types of tissues. And again, I'm mostly reflecting what our experience is, but there are many, many researchers within the NIH, as a good example, where every single type of tissue would benefit the work that they're doing. And that also includes eyes, that includes reproductive tissue, that includes skin and bone, the list goes on. And then, as I said before, whole body donation. So the extension of what somebody can do is extreme. The where, I stated before that researchers that we work with and that are, our recipient list are within the United States. And we have about 10% of the researchers that we work with are somewhere else in the world. They can be in Germany and Switzerland and the UK. And so we are really excited that that we have that outreach and we're not limited just here to the United States. However, we are limited to donors that originate in the United States. And what's important there is we don't accept donor organs that come from outside of the United States because we understand here the process of organ donation. We understand the OPOs and their policies on obtaining authorization, and that the language, albeit there are 57 OPOs, and I think everybody's authorization form is just a little bit different. Some are very, very general, and some are very, very specific. We don't know what the process would be in another country, and we have ample tissue that really do come from U.S. donors, and so it's really one of the biggest reasons also that we don't go outside of the United States, but we are familiar with the process, and that is our rationale. We only stay within the United States. Why I wrote here is how specific is specific enough is that when I stated that there are authorization forms that say I can donate, I will donate any and every organ or tissue for transplant, and that can help somebody. And almost nobody has language like that, but there is also, to the extent of very, very specific tissues and organs that are listed for transplant, yes, for research, yes. And then it's the type of language that follows that. It's saying how it can be used, that it can be used for nonprofit and for-profit. That also has its own little stigma to it. I just shared with you before the biotech companies and the pharmaceutical companies and the critical work that they're doing to be deprived simply because there is a misunderstanding about a for-profit entity would deny everybody the quality of life that we are currently enjoying simply because that for-profit space has the funding to support the types of research. So that's important to remember. But then it also gets into specific language about that genetic research can or cannot be done. And it will talk about cosmetic research that can or cannot be done. And again, if you think about somebody that was disfigured in a car accident, cosmetic research is not rhinoplasty all the time. Cosmetic research and cosmetic transplant can actually help somebody to repair a disfigured accident or disfiguring accident or a disease that causes facial tumors, and that they're going to correct that. So again, it's looking at how specific is specific enough, and then also who is capable of translating that language to a donor family that has just experienced a loss of a loved one, and they're really only understanding less than 10% of the language that is being spoken to them right then and there. So there's often a line as to how far anybody feels that the authorization form should extend to go beyond medical research, education, and therapeutic development, and really allow organizations like ours to vet the type of research that is being done. And so As far as when donation happens, our process is that we are really working within the timelines of the operating room. So it's coordinated at that very same time that a transplant organ is coming out, because we want that surgical individual, we want the surgeon to be the one that's procuring it. They have the expertise there. And we also want to make sure that we're not extending beyond why they were already there in the first place, which was to recover organs. And so while they're on the back table, observing and flushing out those organs that are being used for transplant, there is another set of hands that is recovering the organs for research. And then the same preparation of those organs is following. They're boxed and prepared really simultaneously, and then off to the recipient for transplant or research that's happening. You can also do post-organ recovery when tissue recovery happens. And so that doesn't happen in the OR. Some of the researchers are looking for, very, very highly viable organs and tissues that cannot have more than 30 minutes from the time it was removed from the body. And then there's other researchers that can extend that time. It's called ischemic time, warm ischemic time, and cold ischemic time. So warm ischemic time is when it's still in the body and it hasn't been procured yet, and there's no longer any type of heartbeat. And so there's no blood and therefore no oxygen flowing. And then the cold ischemic time is from the time that the organ is placed on ice and is getting ready to be transported. That slows down the process of that organ and cells deteriorating. So, post-organ recovery, those organs and tissues that can come from that are for researchers that can say, I can go much, much longer. The tissue I'm looking for is not going to deteriorate, and I don't need it to be quite as viable as somebody that's looking for those cells. Surgical discards, those are living donors. Really, really, again, critical areas of research. Explants is a good example. So somebody that has cystic fibrosis and is going to get a lung transplant, there are many researchers that are looking for a cystic fibrosis lung. And so an explanted organ is ideal for something like that. Tumors is another really important area. And individuals with cancer, active cancer, cannot be an organ donor. And so if researchers are really looking for tissue from cancer patients, and these are individuals that are having resected tissues, they're going to have their tumors removed. Those are times when, beyond what the pathology department in the hospital can do, researchers are relying again on that type of critical tissue, but that would be surgical discard. And then postmortem, where they are not going to be an organ donor or a tissue donor. And again, that can be more like the whole body donation. That is when donation happens for the medical research community. Why is really the easiest thing to talk about. Why would somebody donate for medical research? And again, it's why did it frustrate me when nobody was remembering to look and to say, let's make one more phone call, because that one more phone call and that why allowed that donor gift to happen. There's a lot of times when there are not as many organs being used for transplant that were used for research. And that donor family is recognizing their loved one was a donor of 5 organs. Even if 2 of them went for transplant and 3 went for research, they made a difference and they made an impact in countless lives. And so the why is so easy. As I explained to you also, researchers require organ donor organs and tissues because they really are the closest resemblance to living tissue without working with a living individual. So this is to them, the tissue behaves as if it's still within the body. You'll hear in a second, really the extent of how life-saving and life-enhancing donation for medical research can be. We will never quite know the impact of a single donation to medical research. It will help people today. It will help the generation after us and the generation after them. So that ripple effect of organ donation for medical research is somewhat inconceivable. We also know that it adds a very important additional layer to that donor legacy. And at the end of the day, it's just the right thing to do, is to make sure that as the organization that is the steward of the gift, and that is the OPO or the tissue bank, that if that donor family said yes to donation for transplant and to research, then we are one such agency that is ready for that phone call to honor the wishes of that donor family. How can you donate and how can you make sure that somebody knows? There's the donor registry on your driver's license. You can see that here, that you are marked as an organ donor. The most important thing, though, of all is talking to your family. You can be an organ donor, and many of the registries and even at the DMV and on a computer, it doesn't always mention research. It really talks about donation for transplant, and that's organ donation for transplant and tissue donation for transplant and eye donation for transplant. So your family, even when you are registered as a donor, your family will be asked separately about donation for medical research because it has to be listed on an authorization form or an addendum authorization form, even if you've registered as a donor. And this is a legal document. They have to get that separate authorization to make sure that medical research can still move forward. And then as far as willed body programs or whole body donation programs, my understanding when IIAM offered that is that you do have to be pre-registered. And so pre-mortem, you have to register yourself within either a national organization or your local willed body program or university. They actually, there's only so many bodies that they can accept every single year. So that's important that you know. How does somebody gain access to research organs? Have faith in the system. There are many people that are in need of human organs and tissues, and they have to complete a biomaterial transfer agreement. And this really just outlines the liability within the two organizations, that we say that we have vetted the language to ensure that a donation for research can happen, and that this is non-infectious, and that to the degree possible that we have screened this individual, this donor, to make sure that there's not other increased risk factors that are outside of what the researcher himself or herself is looking for. So that agreement, it really allows us to identify who will be using the tissues and what institution they belong to. You do not require an IRB for organs and tissues that come from a non-living individual and that will never go into a living individual. So it is an exemption within the final rule of the Federal Register. So we are still very interested, though, in knowing who will be using it, what the institution that will oversee this. It allows somebody to identify their donor requirements. Are they looking for donors between the ages of 18 and 65? Are they looking for male and or female? Are they looking for lungs and hearts and livers? Are they looking for tissues? How often are they looking for something? There are researchers that say that they need 300 hearts a year, and there's researchers that say they're looking for one lung because they just sometimes need to prove that what they're thinking is going to happen really is what is going to happen. The most important part beyond the legal aspect of it is this allows the researcher to explain to people what it is that they're doing with the tissue. And so what is their research about? While I am not a doctor and don't even play one on TV, having 33 years of reading donor charts and reading researcher descriptions of the work they're doing, I feel like I could have my own PhD. But it is one of the most exciting things that I get to do because as an executive director, I'm one of 3 people that signs off approving of that researcher's application. And then we have an unaffiliated individual that is a subject matter expert and typically a surgeon or an MD that is also now going to sign off. But we get to, we treat ourselves as saying we're sitting in the front row of Radio City Music Hall, and the most talented individuals are asking for us to work with them. And it is mind-blowing, some of the research that's being done. We are really, really excited to talk a little bit about some of the work that we've already been a part of. But what we've really also asked the researchers is that it's very clinical in nature what they're doing. They'll talk about the enzymes, and they'll talk about things that have as many numbers and letters as there are consonants. It's crazy how researchers can write. But we then ask them to please write a paragraph for a donor family. So we want this to be in layman's terms so that we can share really what that benefit and what difference that individual made simply by saying yes to research donation, and our ability to get that organ into the hands of somebody that we work with. So any questions there? Okay, we'll keep going. So in the years that I've been here, this is capturing probably 1/100th of some of the things I know we've been a part of, but just to give you a little insight, we work with some of the most progressive type 1 diabetes research institutions. They are NIH and JDRF funded. That's the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. So they're getting this funding there. There still is not a cure for type 1 diabetes. The goal of researchers is to go from type 1 to type none. It's a very, very aggressive area of research. It's a very expensive area of medicine to try to make sure that diabetics can continue to live a quality of life, but it is a very disruptive disease depending on the extent of the diabetes. Also in our community, we are now much more prevalent in type 2 diabetes because we are a pretty obese community. And so by default, there are individuals that have flipped into the type 2 diabetes category in unprecedented numbers. So researchers, while they've not yet found a cure, they have made significant improvements in how you can treat type 1 diabetes. And that goes anywhere from how do you diagnose it? How can you walk around, and not have to necessarily do the finger prick, but you can do ports now. You can do all kinds of shunts that deliver your medicine. And so they tested with research, whether it was skin for research to say, okay, if I'm delivering an injection and I tested it against human skin, human muscle, from the stomach, from the thigh, they have to make sure, did the medicine itself absorb too quickly into the skin or into the muscle and never make it to the area that it really needed to get to? So they have to learn about the path of delivery that medicine will take. HCV, you have in the 80s was HIV, and in the 90s was HCV. You have COVID today, but these are vaccinations that have become critical in making sure that there is a limited amount of lives lost. And we've worked through donations of human liver and partners of ours that know how to process that whole liver and create cells, those primary cells called hepatocytes. And they put those hepatocytes into the hands of pharmaceutical companies that are going to create medications and learn that they're safe, they're effective. But HCV basically now has demonstrated that there is such a low viral load that it's considered cured. And so that was a result of donated livers that were able to test the treatments for somebody to take orally or through an injection and go on to live a life rather than the amount of people that lost their life. So that's a really, really good example of where the pharmaceutical company is doing this because they have the funding to do this. An amazing group that does infrared imaging on human hearts required hearts that were really, really diseased because that was the patient pool that is going to be treated through infrared imaging. And so without getting too clinical, it was an opportunity for this team of researchers to look at these blocked arteries. And through the imaging, apparently, if you think about it like an earthquake, that there's typically a smaller earthquake before the biggest earthquake happens. That is certainly the one that is more damaging. And the same thing can happen with a heart attack. You can have a non-fatal heart attack, but researchers through infrared imaging can see the bigger blockage that's about to happen, and that prevents the fatal heart attack from happening. So it's because of diseased hearts that couldn't be donated to somebody who needed a heart transplant. Imagine the amount of lives that are saved because of treatment to detect and prevent a heart attack. So that is a life-saving endeavor that happens because of medical research. We are so proud to be working with a researcher up at the University of Rochester's Medical Center who's really studying neonatal lungs. And so these are donor organs that come from a newborn baby and that is carried to term, that was diagnosed in utero with a fatal fetal anomaly. And so our requirement is that these babies will be born alive, and that the family's intention is to carry to term and to meet their baby. And for as long as that baby could give life and have life in the arms of their parents, that they can go on and give life or prevent death more than anything in their afterlife, in a sense. And so the largest end user of these organs are up at the University of Rochester. And that group is kind of making a lung map, a molecular atlas program, but they're studying the developmental stages of babies, but specifically babies that are born prematurely. And these little babies that did not go on to survive will help babies born prematurely whose lungs stopped developing. It's letting researchers understand, why does the lung stop developing, and to try to create some kind of a catalyst, an antagonist that is going to provoke that lung to continue to develop. Much like a starfish, when you can take off one of its arms and it knows how to grow back an arm, researchers are trying to figure out, how do you do that with the human lung? And if it works in premature babies, they're saying it would go off, that technology would also be translated into somebody that has COPD in later in life. And that if you can you can figure out how the lung can repair itself in its earliest stages of life, you can also provoke lungs in a 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old to heal itself by that same technology, that same principle. So those are just some ideas. I get very excited about it, but I wanted to make you excited to know what an impact already research has had. We are currently working in the area of COVID, which is incredible to be a part of. That same research group up at the University of Rochester has been involved in taking lungs from donors that had COVID. And in fact, now they can take it from donors that have COVID. And what they're really trying to do is to understand the difference between adults and pediatrics that are experiencing the virus, and why pediatrics, especially in the beginning of COVID, why pediatrics are so much more tolerant than the adult pool of patients. And their work was really to try to make sure that they could prevent folks that have COVID from going on a ventilator and then dying while on a ventilator. So it's a very preventative path. We also have now a new study that we're supporting with pancreas, because researchers are curious to see, since diabetes is an autoimmune disease, and since COVID can sometimes be exacerbated in a person that already has a pre-existing autoimmune disease, they're thinking that they've seen a rise in type 2 diabetes as a result of COVID, and that they're trying to prove or disprove that somebody who already has a compromised or vulnerable immune system might get tripped right into type 2 diabetes if they have COVID. So I know that a lot of folks out there want to make sure that that's not something that they should be putting on their radar. So really a lot of different areas in research that are involving COVID. In diabetes, not only is it to prevent and cure type 1, but we want to improve the treatment for it. Another amazing area of research that these little babies, these are neonate donor program, researchers discovered that not everybody is born with the same amount of islet cells, those beta cells. Those are the cells that are being destroyed, and how researchers, when those cells are destroyed, your body can't produce insulin, so you're having to take it. What researchers discovered when they had the ability to look at pancreata from the earliest stages of life was that not everybody is born with the same amount of beta cells. So go back to the COVID example. If you have a viral hit like RSV or like COVID, and you already are a person with a lower amount of beta cells at birth, and we don't know why, somebody might be born with 10 million and somebody else might be born with 6 million. If you happen to be the person that was born with 6 million, you would not be able to fight off another virus like RSV or COVID the same way somebody with a higher amount of cells, and you would then become vulnerable to a different autoimmune disease like diabetes. So that was a really big aha moment for all of the researchers that are studying pancreata from these neonates, was to learn that not everybody is born with the same amount, and some folks are just born more vulnerable than the next person. So I'm going to go on to the next slide here. Organ preservation. We have seen amazing ways that an organ that only probably 15 years ago would have had to stay in the northeastern region, like a lung or a heart, where those organs could not be outside of the human body more than 4 hours, maybe up to 8 hours. And now they're going coast to coast because you can put these devices where the organ is being pumped with a perfusate that has physiologically compatible components so that the cells stay alive and that they're either cooled or they're working well by not being shocked. And so again, research allows these types of device companies, these biotech companies, to create these machines that will allow an organ that once was rejected because it couldn't make it to the end to the recipient, or even once were rejected because they didn't think the organ was going to work well. What an opportunity to be able to put that organ on a machine and to watch it pump and to say, you know what, actually it's doing great. And this is how it's going to perform in a recipient. And so they learn that what was previously rejected sometimes in the future really is a good, suitable organ for a recipient. So this is another way that research is saving lives and saving organs and trying to shorten that gap between donors and the recipient waiting list. And we talked about pharmaceutical. It just gets a bad rap, but in the end, this is an opportunity for new, safe drugs that will be available to treat diseases. You are going to test drug-drug interactions, which is why when you go into CVS and you might be already on one medication that postmenopausal women, as an example, might be on some kind of a hormone therapy or taking some other type of medicine, and they have a virus, not COVID, but they could have some other virus, even an ear infection, and they're going to take an antibiotic, and that computer, because of research, is going to alert them to say there's going to be an adverse drug-drug interaction. So research has taught the medical community what one family of medicines won't get along with and another family of medicines. That's another life-saving example. We have also researchers that can tell, as I just said, about the side effects. You can also look at the metabolism within the human system because you have those cells that came from a human. And so they can tell when one drug that's with another drug, if the new drug is being consumed, it might speed up the metabolism of the existing medicine, and therefore use a transplant recipient as an example. If they're on an immunosuppressive drug and they take an antibiotic that they've never taken before that has what they call enzyme, when you speed something up, let's see, it's inducement, that it's speeding up the metabolism of your anti-rejection medicine, and then suddenly it's not in your body. And they have actually seen organs rejected unexpectedly because there was another medicine that was taken that had enzyme inducement. And on the other side of that, if you have enzyme inhibition that happens as a result of two drugs that don't get along, you might overdose mistakenly on a medicine that you were always taking because of the new medicine that you started to take. It stops that existing medicine from breaking down, and now there's too much of it in your system. So again, this is really important that research is available and that the pharmaceutical research happens so that when we are taking medicine that we know that it won't be life-threatening every time that you take it. And I wanted to just leave you with a statement here about how researchers recognize that there is a donor gift behind every organ or tissue that we send to them. They know that they could not do what they do without that donor family that said yes. And they also know that that was a life that was lost as a result of them being able to receive this organ. They are incredibly respectful and grateful. And I am grateful also that by teaching you that you may talk to somebody as well and have a new appreciation for different ways that you can donate organs that will save a life through research.
So as a heart recipient, I got transplanted at the Hospital University of Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. I was one of these guys that I wanted pictures of everything. I wanted my heart. And, unfortunately, I did sign a waiver. And as soon as that heart was taken out of me, it went in Dr. Ken Margolis's hands and whisked up to the Penn lab. I didn't even get a picture that they promised me. But I did get an invitation. We got an invitation from Ken Margolis, who actually spoke at one of our events. No one understood what he was saying, but he spoke at one of our events to come up and see what they do in the lab. And maybe I can get him to give us a virtual tour through that. But it's just exciting to know as an organ recipient, I'm also an organ donor, and my old heart went into research to help develop medications and other things, right? So I just think this is such a fascinating area. You've answered a lot of questions, Gina. Thank you so much, because, we do a lot of tabling events and people come up to us and they say, oh, well, we're too old to donate, or, no one wants my organs, everything that I've been through, and they ask about donating other things or donating their body to science. So, this really helps answer some of those questions. Did any of our studio audience have any questions? Jim?
I'd just like to support what Gina was saying. A good friend of mine, when his mother passed, he was offered the opportunity to do a whole body donation, and he wasn't sure. And he went back to his surgeon and said, how important is this? And the surgeon said, that's why I can do my surgery today. That's how important it is. Yeah. And with that, he went back and made the decision to donate. And a year later, got the ashes back. So he had something to bury and remember her by. And at the same time, it was a very solid answer to his question, I thought. So just supporting what you're saying, Gina, this is really a special way of helping.
It is. Thank you, Jim.
Did anyone else have a question, Carl?
Yeah, I do. This past summer, I learned that my transplant surgeon of 25 years ago is now working in the perfusion arena for heart transplantations at the Minnesota or Minneapolis Heart Institute. Mm-hmm. Are you connected with that group at all?
So yes.
Okay.
So there's a group up there called Medtronics. And so there are groups that are popping up all over the place, but we have been a supplier or provider of donor organs to them, as well as probably 10 other organizations that, it's as simple as sometimes just saying, okay, when I'm creating this device, I need to make sure that all of the apparatus works and that an organ can actually fit on this device, and that I can cannulate, which is really just attaching kind of a tube onto the organ itself. And how does that fasten tightly so that the perfusate can go right through and make that organ, that heart pump and that heartbeat. So it's everything from the design to the observation to the approval. And so that last one is the most critical, is that before that particular device can get off the ground and get their FDA approval, they have to really do a lot of proof of concept and validation testing. And that's also where research organs are critical, because they have to do it as if it was really happening for a transplant organ exactly the same way over and over again and make sure it works.
Well, it was very gratifying for me to learn that after not having seen or spoken with him in almost 25 years. And I learned that he was working there, and I reached out to him, and he wrote back to me telling me, I'm glad you're doing well. So that was really good to hear.
It also says something to me that when you have somebody with such credibility behind them that was working in the transplant and surgical community to go onto the device side, because they really believe that it is going to save more organs, and that with their own surgical experience and their background, they really are going to be the leader in making sure that they're treating the right patients and that their design is improving whatever the obstacles were in the past from getting an organ from coast to coast, from patient to patient. And then really, what is it that you are observing and can fix in a donor heart that you could not have done if it were not what they call ex vivo, outside of the body, placed on this device where you're watching it as if it was behaving in the human body, but it's really just on a machine. So it's really remarkable.
Thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome. It was my privilege, my privilege, my pleasure. Again, it's something I could talk about over and over again. And every day the stage changes as to who the next star is going to be. But I think the real stars are the donors and the donor families that start the whole process by saying yes.
Gina, if I could ask you one more question. I've often faced this question myself, and I don't know the answer, and I've never asked anybody before. In a donation situation, the patient is dead, the heart is recovered, put in a body, and it continues to beat.
Yes.
I've been asked, is the heart alive or dead? My answer is, I don't know. I've never asked. Maybe I don't have an answer. But I said, if it wasn't alive, I wouldn't be here telling you my story, would I? So yes. How would you answer that? Is the organ, let's use the heart as an example, removed from the dead person's body, brought back to beating? Is there such a thing as an organ being dead or alive?
I'm going to say that, first of all, don't take this as, pure truth. This is my speculation, is that if the organ were dead, you would not be able to bring it back to life unless there was something that was still even remotely living within it. The reason that organ donation is successful is because they are doing, the doctors are doing everything they can to remove the organ while, and right at the moment where they can control the oxygen that was in the organs to minimize the amount of cell death. And so it's so preventative that it's keeping the organ and the cells alive. That's why the cooling process typically is happening, or when they're putting it on the normothermic, the room temperature machines, it's to not shock that organ and to keep that physiologically compatible fluid going through the organs to stay alive. So the individual has passed, but they're trying to keep the organ and the cells within the organ alive so that it can work and function in its next life.
Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions for Gina before we wrap it up here tonight? Well, Gina, I just want to thank you for sharing with us this just insightful presentation on what happens other than regular organ donation. And we just wish you the best of luck in all the other future endeavors, what's going on with COVID and all the other exciting research that's going on.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And, it's every one of us, even when you tell anybody anything that you learned tonight, we're all making a difference. And that's all anybody could ever ask for.
Well, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
All righty. Good night now.